My name is Gabriel Sanchez. I'm a professor in the Department of Political Science here at the University of New Mexico. I'm also a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., and run UNM Center for Social Policy. We're actually projecting that in 2024, immigration is going to have a pretty consequential impact on voting outcomes and potentially have a major consequence on who ends up being our next president. And the reason that might be somewhat surprising for folks who track immigration closely is immigration was not even in the top 5 of most important issues for voters in the last 2 election cycles. So this kind of resurfacing as a key major kind of theme in the election is relatively new for voters and for us experts talking about the issue. I think when we look at the 2020 election, for example, all energy shifted to COVID. And I think even former President Trump, who would have liked to make more of the issue of immigration, essentially had to move away from that to healthcare and to COVID. So that's been probably the most significant distinction between 2016, when we saw it as a big issue, into what we're seeing over the last couple of election cycles. What we're seeing now is a ramped up effort to talk about border enforcement. And I think that's what's a bit different than prior election cycles, where essentially Democrats would be talking about path to citizenship, mainly courting Latino voters, Republicans border enforcement. Now I think both parties are having to talk a little bit more about both. Pathway to citizenship, what do you do with folks that are here, but also a conversation probably starting with border enforcement. I think one of the most important issues that I think people consider is that Latino voters must all think immigration is the most important issue to them. And in reality, candidates should be wary of this as well. Immigration, just like for voters overall, was not a very top priority for Latinos in the last 2 election cycles. For like all Americans, we're seeing it ramp up for Latinos, so I'd anticipate it being a top 5 issue. But for the most part, Latinos are talking about the economy, cost of healthcare, education, other domestic policy issues, not necessarily immigration being at the front of their minds when they're thinking about who they're going to vote for. New Mexico is a little bit of a different context. Even though we're a majority Hispanic state at this point and a border state, we have a relatively small percentage of immigrants of our overall population, less so than obviously California, Texas, which are much bigger population states, but even fewer than Colorado and Arizona. So we don't normally see immigration be a front of the top of the mind issue for voters here in the state of New Mexico, other than our southern congressional district, which is going to be one of the, if not the most competitive in the entire nation. And we're already seeing campaign ads talking about immigration and that election space. So I think voters here in New Mexico, at least those in the TV market associated with our southern district, are probably going to be thinking about immigration because they're seeing commercials about it. I think part of the dynamic is former President Trump has always liked the theme of immigration. He feels that's a winner for the Republican Party and for his campaign. So he started talking about immigration immediately when it hit campaign season. I think what's transitioned a little bit is you've seen the opportunity for Biden as a candidate first to be able to essentially counter Trump's narrative and say, hey, I had a bipartisan bill attempting to do something at the border. Former President Trump, you essentially got in the way of that. You asked other members of Congress on the Republican side to essentially kill the bill. So it changed the dynamic a little bit about how immigration was going to be featured in the presidential election. And now, obviously, with the change at the top of the ticket moving from Biden to Harris, this even accentuates the theme of immigration policy, because the vice president essentially had immigration as one of, if not her top priorities as vice president. So I think that just makes for a very interesting backdrop in which immigration will probably be more front and center than it might have been otherwise.